Good morning, and welcome to another week of Journey with Christ. I'm your host, Mark Mitchell, preaching minister here at the Park Avenue Church of Christ in Charleston, West Virginia. And I'm joined, as always, the expert, the theologian extraordinaire, Steve Fox.
You're not the first one that ever said I was a legend in my own mind.
Well, you know, I'm kind of tired of saying you've been a minister for over 50 years.
Yeah. That people, if they tune in once a week, they probably figured
They've heard that.
Yeah. But they're still trying to figure out how I've preached for 52 years and I'm 38.
Yeah, what a miracle
It's
that
the
is.
new math, I guess.
What a miracle.
Well, are you doing okay this morning too?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing better than I deserve, but still concerned about the world that we live in, you know.
Oh, man. I watch those mothers carrying those babies, and I think, this man's evil. That's all you can say. He's evil. To kill people for absolutely no reason. Of course,
He feels he has justifiable reasons. Doesn't mean that they're accurate, but you know, I'm always want to be careful. At least myself personally. I know what you're saying. I mean, there have been throughout history a few people that you could look at their historical context. I mean, what the Christians dealt with in the first century, Nero was. He was
evil.
He was evil. Mm-hmm. Hitler would have been another one.
Mussolini, Pol Pot.
I mean, there's been several throughout history. The power is such a corrupting influence, and as humans, I don't think we're capable of handling power. It's the rare individual who can do something.
Yeah. I hear people say all the time, God has a role for every person. He has a purpose for every person. And you start looking at history and you go, did those guys have a purpose? Did Hitler and Stalin and Lenin, did those guys have a purpose?
Yeah.
But that's another discussion.
That's another theological.
We can have when you and I figure that out.
Yeah. Again, I keep. Yeah, most of it's going down that rat hole. We do the 2 minute rabbit hole.
Let me give you a little intro as to what we're going to talk about today. And as I was writing this and stealing stuff from other people, I thought, you know, there are a lot of people in our society that just don't get any credit for anything, even in their own lives, because other people think that they're better than that group of people. And I remember, some of our audience may not remember this stuff, but I remember People magazine, who was always had about
the most beautiful, the most influential.
Now, I'm just guessing that you and I were never in that magazine.
You know, they gave me a call one time, but they had the wrong number.
You were busy. The number was 46. They wanted somebody with an IQ of 46.
Yeah, it was something of that nature.
And on TV, Robin Leach had this, not a movie, a TV program called The Lifestyles of the Rich and
Famous.
I don't remember him ever having the lifestyles of the poor and the obscure.
Yeah.
So, if you're rich and famous, you're at another plateau, at another level. Well, we're going to talk about what I consider to be one of the most practical things that Jesus ever encountered, and that is, he didn't make differences in the lives of people like that.
Wow.
It's very clear.
You know, and it is a characteristic of Jesus that is so counter to everything in our culture and everything that's in this world. Who are the people normally esteemed? Even in the Pharisee branch, the religious group. I mean, the Pharisees as themselves, they were esteemed. They were the people. Now, if you were a peasant on the street, they knew there was a difference between the two of you. One of them God loved, the other one God didn't. Mm-hmm. And isn't that
As an example of that, when Susie and I go to Nicaragua, well, we haven't gone the last 3 years because of the Civil War and the virus. But when we go to Nicaragua, we have to be very careful because some people in different religious backgrounds, they believe that if a person is poor, that came about by something that he did in his past life.
Or families.
And you're not allowed to help him. Because if you help him and give him assistance, give him food or money, you're helping him continue in his poverty or to continue in his lifestyle. And God's already punished him, so you're not allowed to. So you have to be careful. People just think differently.
Boy, doesn't that, how that works out great for rich people, don't it?
Oh, yeah. That means
they don't ever have to help a soul.
No. They're on a road to success.
And so the first century Christianity, they've been looking at it, well, that's heresy.
That's no kidding. But that's just that's not the Christian religion. That's other religion.
Yeah, but you know, even though we have people we live in a Judeo-Christian society, America, which it was more close to a Judeo-Christian maybe 50 years ago, not as much today. But there was a time when if you were the person who picked up garbage or you were the doctor that waited on you at the hospital, they were both treated with respect. Because one of the things my dad was so adamant, and I'm glad he did, because he said, you know, everybody does what they do. You know, you don't elevate anybody over like, you know, hey, they're the greatest.
And he doesn't have to become like me.
He doesn't have to become like me, and I don't have to become like him. And we can both hold our heads up high as we do what we do.
Of course, that thing, when you talk about poverty, it shouldn't surprise us too much when a person is walking around and thinks that cow is his mother.
Yeah.
So we do have differences, and sometimes you have to deal with those differences.
Absolutely.
When we look at world history, we find out that there are people who are powerful and rich and beautiful and people who are of royalty. But every society also has its untouchables, the lower classes, the minorities, people who are homeless, people who are unemployed, people who are on welfare. And I know a lot of people, I've met them, I've talked to them, I've listened to them who say, well, you know, those lazy, no good people, those dishonest people, those people live in poverty, they deserve that kind of lifestyle. Well, they don't deserve that because that's not true. Just because somebody, you know...
By definition, it's not necessarily 100% true. But you all know that choices can be made to put you in that place.
The consequences are different, yeah.
Yes.
But, you know, at Canal City, we helped with a ministry for children at South Park.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ladies at church came up to me afterwards and said, you shouldn't call those kids South Park. I said, that's not South Park from TV, that's South Park from South Park.
That's the address.
Yeah, that's the address. And, you know, you get thinking about some of those people that we got really close to. You say, well, it'd help you if you got a job. They can't get a job. They can't get a job because a job demands that you have a car to get there or a bus that goes on your route to get you there. You don't have any money for buying a car. You certainly don't have any money for buying insurance. And people are just trapped sometimes, and they're doing the best they can. And other people, Jesus would have never done that.
Well,
Jesus loved nobodies.
Absolutely. I mean, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And there are actually some, Luke writes it as blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He doesn't even put in there, which Jesus may have very well said at one time, blessed are the poor. You know, and it's not like... sometimes there are people out there who look upon... even James says, you know, tells his listeners or readers that that the rich should be careful and the poor should be thankful that they're both in the stage that they're in. And there is a lot of truth in that, that given the context of sometimes having too much is a dangerous place to be, because you, as Jesus put it, you're more apt to lose your soul over wealth than you are anything else.
Exactly right. It's a power thing.
It is a power thing, much like what we talked about with a while ago with Putin. So, but at times, though, we live in a society where we are looking at people who've had opportunities, but then, much like the rich young, the prodigal son, who wasted everything and ended up in the pig pen.
Just threw it all away.
Threw it all away. I mean, some people have had opportunities and blew them.
Mm-hmm.
So it is such a precarious position to be in. As we look at people, to what extent, in fact, I've had this conversation recently with someone who's a member here, to what degree do we help? Because if we help, that we just help them continue to dig the hole they're living in.
Yeah.
Some people we help, we actually help.
About 3 weeks ago, there was a gentleman that came into our Bible class, in the adult class, and just kind of took over. He'd been here a couple times before, but I looked at him as one of those, what I would call nobodies, because when we first met him, he was living in his car. So that's pretty much a qualification for what a nobody is. Or if you're living in your car. But nobody went over to him and said, you can't come in here.
Yeah.
And yesterday, we had another gentleman who's been here a lot, and he came into the class and sat there just listening to class. And most people, I think, are a little bit uncomfortable around him, but that's what we have to work on.
Yes.
Now, when you find out that, they don't have a gun, they're not packing, they're not going to injure anybody, you can trust them, and that's a little bit different situation than just dealing with somebody who walks in the door and is a direct stranger.
Yes.
I wrote down some nobodies that Jesus worked with, because most people that Jesus worked with were nobodies. There are a few examples where it was the opposite of that, the rich young ruler and Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. But he also worked with fishermen and tax collectors and the poor and the handicapped and children. He worked a lot with women, and God forbid, he worked with Gentiles too. And so here you have a list of nobodies. I started thinking about what we were going to talk about this morning, and I had some people in my life that mean so much to me now, but when I first met them, I couldn't get used to thinking the way they thought or living the way they were living. My best running friend that I've ever had, it has 5% vision. And one time I asked him if he wanted to come over to my house and run. He said, well, I can't. I said, why not? He said, I don't have a car. I said, you don't have a car? Why don't you have a car?
I can only see 5%,
He said,
Steve.
I'm legally blind. I said, oh. I had run with him 2 times, Mark, and didn't know he was blind. The guy's amazing.
Yeah.
And he, it's tough to talk, at first, it's tough to talk to somebody who's blind. It's tough to talk to somebody who's deaf. But that doesn't make those people nobodies. And a lot of us shy away from any kind of discussion or narrative with people who are different than we are. If they're blind, we don't want to talk to them. If they're deaf, we have a hard time talking to them. I taught a rehab class at Charleston General for 20 years. It was a transition class in the rehab section for people who had been severely injured and would probably be in a wheelchair the rest of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
I will confess to you that there have been times earlier in my life when I saw somebody in a wheelchair, I just walked past them. And if they were just walking down the hallway, I wouldn't do that to them. I wouldn't ignore them, but I didn't know how to deal with that. Well, I learned in a hurry in that class because almost everybody in there was in a wheelchair. So how do you get down to their level? How do you get down on your knees and talk to them? How do you help them through difficulties that they're going to have? So all of us have dealt with those kind of, let me give you another example. There's this guy named Mark, what's his last name? Mitchell's his last name. And he does a lot of work at the prison, works with prisoners. I'm sure the first time you went into that prison, you could, hey, how you doing? What's going on, man? You know, it was not a circus atmosphere.
No.
And most people, if you put them in that situation, throw them down in the middle of a prison and say, talk to these guys, get to know these guys. Most of us would like to stay over there in the corner and not talk to anybody.
Well, actually, every time before we would go into the prison, and especially true for a new person who was just going in for the first time, they would spend 6 weeks, and a third of the 6 weeks of weekly class discussions were going to be related on what you say, how you act, what you do, what you can do, what you can't do, all the various things, because you need to be able to know how to relate to them, but yet in a way that is kind and respectful, and at the same time not being overly interested in what their reasons for. In fact, you don't even ask somebody why they're in there, but that would seem like a normal question, but you don't, because.
Well, if I don't know what the definition is, but in my mind, a prisoner, somebody in prison for 5 years, 10 years, those are nobodies. I mean, they have nothing. They're just living on the bad food that they get every day.
Well, they're actually in worse place than, honestly, I think sometimes than someone who's homeless. But at least a homeless can choose to decide where he wants to go. Someone in prison,
they don't make a lot of decisions, do they?
No. No. So
I think it's useful for us to think about how Jesus would treat people who were blind and people who were deaf, people who were prisoners. We're going to look at some examples of what we've been talking about up to this point, and most of these are going to come from the book of Mark, because Mark expresses in his gospel that Jesus is the Son of Man. He is connected with these people like nobody has ever connected with them before. And he got in a lot of trouble when he would do certain things, and people in the circle who are the Pharisees or religious leaders, well, if he doesn't know who that is, he can't be the Christ.
Yep. How many times do you think he heard that or read someone's mind who thought that?
You just leave those kids alone. Don't. I mean, to the kids, they said, you leave Jesus alone. Don't you kids go up there and bother him. Those kids were nobodies. And Jesus said, unless you don't become like one of them, you can't even get in the kingdom of God.
Well, imagine in Jesus' time, you could add a lot more to the definition of nobodies. Actually, you could have added women, because I just now looked at it. It is on there, isn't it? You just hadn't got there yet.
No.
Women.
I just thought I'd made a mistake.
Oh, no. And you could very well, like, of course, we've talked about this in prior discussions about the exclusive attitudes that the Jews had over nationalities and races. I mean, if you weren't a Jew, then you weren't anybody. You were a nobody.
I think you're right about women and children, because Jesus treated women so well. They were a part of his ministry. They even helped pay for part of his ministry, since he didn't have a home and didn't have any money himself.
Treated Mary like a male disciple. So to such an extent that Martha was like, will you tell her to get in here in the kitchen? Doesn't she know what her role is?
She's a woman.
She's a woman. What is she doing in there?
Go back in the kitchen and bake some cookies, and we'll talk about it afterwards.
Jesus commended Mary for choosing the best. I'm sure.
And you know what he said? He said, there's one thing you need.
Yeah.
Would it be awesome if Jesus came up to you and said, Mark, there's one thing you got to work on?
Yeah.
Man, I'd be tickled to death.
I know.
One
Listen.
thing I got to work on?
I mean, I can narrow this all down now.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm fairly sure he'd show up to me and he says, Mark, I've got to be like one of the letters to the churches in Revelations. I've got a few things against you. I'm trying to make a little light humor, but we all are dealing with many things.
Jesus loved nobodies. We've already talked about that. Most of the people that Jesus worked with could be defined as nobodies. And we're going to look at some examples, and Mark is going to give us at least 4 examples that all of them come from.
I don't know if we'll make 4, but we'll sure give it a whirl. If you want to turn your Bibles to Mark chapter 10, we have the story of blind Bartimaeus. And I'm just going to read a little. No, I'll read it the whole thing. It's kind of short. Verse 46 of Mark chapter 10. Then they came to Jericho as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stopped and said, Call him. So they called to the blind man, Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you. Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked him. The blind man said, Rabbi, I want to see. Go, said Jesus, your faith has healed you. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. You know, this was actually one of my favorite sermons because I love. You think the question of what Jesus says to him, what do you want me to do for you? Well, that seems kind of stupid. He's blind. But honestly, I've known people who are just pretty happy to be in the state they're in. It's sort of like the person that you run into that you ask them how they're doing, and you know what the answer to the question's always going to be. You know, they're dealing with this or dealing with that, and they almost take pride that their life is such a wreck, such a mess. And you wonder, you know, now, don't get me wrong. I understand some people's predicament is pretty extreme and pretty difficult. But blind Bartimaeus, I mean, there were supposed to be a sort of a welfare system in place in the town of Jerusalem, where those who were unable, they were supposed to be able to go to places and people were supposed to help them out, you know. But this is one of those aspects that Jesus saw in their following the law, that they'd kind of like, they'd chosen, that's not really that important, you know, me helping out poor people. But
well, as we go through these 4 or 5 examples, it's good to look at how would other people treat them in our society, in our world,
and how
did Jesus treat them.
Yeah, there's a definite distinction here.
Do you know what we learned from Bartimaeus? We learned from Bartimaeus, just ignore the world.
Yeah.
When the world starts telling you to do stuff that you know is not right, that there's a better way to do it, just ignore them, because they said, get away from him. Get away from him. He can't talk, and
he's too important for you to bother.
Picking up, yeah. He's on a time schedule. And
you understand? That's the Messiah that just walked by.
Behind, yeah.
Yeah. Don't bother him. You're a nobody.
And you know, I'm not saying this to sound arrogant. I hope you don't take it as me as being arrogant. If you want to, you can, but I hope you don't. Nicaragua has been so important for me and Susie for the trips, the 20 trips that we've spent in in Managua. I have never felt so much like Jesus than working with those poor kids. I just can't imagine somebody mistreating those kids. And then you look at Ukraine, what they're doing, or what the leadership in Russia is doing, and you think, how do these people sleep at night? Because I've never felt so much like Jesus as I do when I have some kind of connection with those kids.
I know.
And here you see these people saying, nah, get those kids away from him. And then Jesus kind of turns the tables and says, if you don't become like one of them, you're not going to make it. Yeah.
Well, our next person to talk about is in Mark chapter 5. I don't necessarily, I guess I could read it. This story is a little bit more well known to us. It's the woman with the blood issue. And you have you have to love the fact that even when Jesus is not aware, he's helping someone. Mm-hmm. And changing their life without even knowing it.
Oh, you're talking about a life change.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have to go into detail, but most of us know what was wrong with this woman.
Yeah, this is about the woman. We all know the story where she comes up to Jesus in a crowd, and she has told herself, if I can just touch his cloak, he will heal me. What kind of faith does that take, Steve?
A lot.
Sometimes I look at the world we live in, and
how'd you like to try to fix something for 12 years and you couldn't make it?
You have a physical condition that is for 12 years, nothing has changed about it. And in fact,
in one day it would be devastating.
She was unclean.
Yeah.
Period. She was a woman who was unclean. You talk about when you're looking at the ladder of where you are in society. Of nobodies. That little thing that as society we do. She was pigeonholed at the bottom. Mm-hmm. As a woman and an unclean woman. No better than a leper. And I mean that seriously. No better than a leper. Because she had to announce to every person she came in contact, I'm unclean, unclean, unclean.
In those societies, everybody would have known what's the matter with her. But she lived in a neighborhood where probably a lot of people knew her.
I'm really surprised that no one yelled before she got to Jesus. But evidently everybody was looking at Jesus. She comes up behind him, touches his cloak, and with the thought and prayer in her heart, if I touch his cloak, she can heal me. He can heal me. He'll heal me. And all of a sudden, the power leaves Jesus, and he realizes, hey, somebody just got a little juice out.
There have been a couple times where I had to deal with people who had AIDS. And what I mean by dealing with is take them by the hand and take them from one place to another, take them from a medical tent to another medical tent. And you can just imagine the crowds and the society and the neighborhood seeing her every day and knowing that in their mind she'll die like that. She's not going to have anybody that can fix that after 12 years. But Jesus helps a nobody. And you talk about the definition of a nobody, it was certainly in this paragraph.
Yeah, I can remember during the COVID time periods, even though you had your mask on, if you walked into a room and you coughed, next thing you know, you had a clear aisle for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of a sudden, you were given all the room you were needed.
Well, it's amazing to me, all these doctors that work in third world countries and in countries like ours, where there are so many things that they could have, that they could get, that they could be working with people, and the next thing you know, they're the ones who are sick.
The most beautiful thing in this story of the woman with the blood disease is the fact that when she confesses to Jesus, I'm the one who touched you, and then he calls her daughter. Mm-hmm. What an endearing statement to that young woman, or maybe not young, but he did call her daughter. But what a loving expression of Jesus as he deals with those who are sometimes treated as nobodies. All of a sudden, the Messiah, the Son of God, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Creator of heaven and earth calls her daughter, which is a family relationship. I mean, it's just saying, hey.
Well, Mark has a kind of, in this section of the book, has a concluding paragraph that kind of describes everything that went before. And I think if we read that paragraph, we'll be able to start next week with the same paragraph. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a lonely place and rest a while, for there were many people coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat." They were.
Where are you? I'm lost.
Mark 6,
Oh,
verse 31. Oh, I switched this chapter on you.
okay.
But you can just imagine the crowds, or maybe you can't imagine the crowds. He's giving away food and he's healing people. That'd get me over there. That'd get me to go look at what people are talking about. And so that's what the apostles gathered together with Jesus, and they reported to him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a lonely place and rest a while." Even people, we all need to rest every once in a while. I'm resting a lot since I retired.
Well, you know, one of the things that I've been preaching about for the last couple Sundays is Matthew 11, beginning of verse 28, where Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you and take my rest." Take what is available to you by being in relationship with me, yoked with me. There is, when we look at the world's system, you have to, in order to do okay in the world system, you have to have something of value that puts you in at least a good enough spot where you're not on the lower half of the spectrum, you're on the upper half of the spectrum. Because on the lower half of the spectrum, you feel like all you're doing is carrying everybody else. Mm-hmm. On the upper half, you seem to be riding on top of everybody else. In Jesus's understanding of the kingdom economy, everybody's equal, nobody's better than anyone else, and more importantly, we need to treat one another as kindred family, where when life gives you lemons, makes them lemonade, and helps one another out.
6:34. In disembarking, he saw a great multitude there coming to him for help again, and he felt compassion for them. The guy's in a wheelchair, the guy's blind, the guy's deaf, the guy's in prison. We're supposed to feel compassion for him. Obviously, we can't do the miracles that Jesus did, but we can help people who fit that category and fit that definition of what a nobody is. He saw a great multitude, and he felt compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Mm. And he began to teach them many things.
Well,
he didn't say, "Okay, you, and you guys leave because you're not going to get to listen to this teaching. You guys can stay. 1, 2, 3. Remember when you were a little kid and people were passing stuff out and you didn't get it? You didn't get one, and everybody else got an ice cream cone or a toy or something. It's an awful feeling.
Oh, I remember as a young kid, one of the most I'll never forget the first time they were choosing up sides for a ball game, and I was the last person picked, and I was just like, "This, how embarrassing is this?" I mean, I know where I stack up in this realm. I'm the least of the least.
That's why spelling bees are so much fun. Okay, everybody line up along the wall, and we're going to embarrass you all.
Well, you know, Steve, this is going to be a great topic, and we'll continue there next week where we talk about the demon-possessed man, and we're going to talk about the Canaanite woman. And then Steve has got a really good one to talk to us about, and I'm going to leave that as a surprise.
I think Mark was designated to do that one.
Not the last one.
Yeah. I got it right here, Mark Mitchell. I got it written right there.
Okay, well, we'll figure it out when we get there.
I'll give you a hint. He was to the left or the right of somebody.
Somebody.
Yeah.
Well, on behalf of Steve and I, we thank you so much for tuning in, and we do look forward to being with you again next week. So, have a great week. Continue to remember to pray for the world that we live in. It's a bad place.